recorded, and then I'll upload it as soon as it's encoded from the RNet server. Okay, so today, as we move through to the final session in our module 2 on building the self-awareness through self-observation, we're going to focus on cognition today. So we've been through from attitudes to emotions to behaviour change, and now we're looking at cognitive change. Now, of course, really what we're being is quite artificial here in breaking up the self into its multiple dimensions, when in fact we experience activities and interactions in our daily life with all of those elements all meshed together into our work and our personal life experiences. So it's a little bit artificial to break them all down, but sometimes it's just a bit easier to get a handle on one element of the self at a time, rather than trying to look at the incredible interactions and the fabric of ourselves, which is a completely interwoven mosaic, and that can be a little more awkward to try and analyze as one dimension. So it's a bit easier for us to break it down a little bit, and that's the reason that we do that. Of course, though, in order to move on to that full capacity to lead yourself in a variety of realms, we then put it all back together again in the final module, and so that will begin next week. But let's this week have a look at cognitive change. And so, as I just said, in terms of becoming an effective leader, what we're really thinking about across the self-leadership unit is looking at emotions, behavior and thoughts, and you being able to take responsibility for what you feel, what you do, how you think, and in all of that taking a strengths-based approach so that you can take place a positive lens over those experiences in order to draw out your strengths and use those strengths in order to begin to build where you believe you might have some gaps, or where you believe that you've got elements that you could improve. And to be really honest, we're all on a journey of improvement, and we will be for our entire life. So it's not that any one of us can sit down and go, well, we're ultimately successful, we've self-actualized, and we've learned all that we're ever going to need to learn in life. That really, it never occurs. You might get to a point where you feel quite comfortable, and that within the zone that you work in, that you feel really have a great deal of self-efficacy because you feel confident in the role that you're working in. But the moment you move out of that role into a different role, or you try to stretch yourself in a different realm, whether it be outside of the work realm, then there'll be skills and competencies that you need to grow in order to be, once again, feeling completely confident and having a great deal of self-efficacy for those roles. So I think it's really important that in terms of our leadership journey, we recognise that we are constantly updating and learning new skills, reflecting on the past successes that we may have had, reflecting on the past challenges that we may have had, and looking for opportunities to grow and be the best that we can possibly be. And as we said right back in the very beginning of this whole journey, was that really we're wanting to try and help facilitate you achieving your greatest potential. And your potential is different to your colleagues and different to the people in this room. And so it's really important that you're focused on the self and where you are and where you'd like to grow, and not compare yourself to other colleagues who are on a very different journey. I'll say, okay, so today we're actually going to look at cognitive change, and we're going to work through very briefly some of the theories and evidence from the literature on our mindsets and how our self-talk and the way in which we process what we're experiencing can have a real impact on our leadership capabilities. And indeed, being able to manage that voice in your head when you are interacting, particularly as a leader, is a really critical skill, so that you can use your insight and your foresight in order to modify how you are engaging with the situation, to draw out from colleagues and the people around you the types of information and actions that might be beneficial in order to move an entire debate or discussion forward, or to help ensure that activities or projects move progressively through to a successful completion. And cognitive change is it's one of those really interesting areas where in a lot of ways, when you're in the midst of a discussion or an activity, you might be articulating verbally something, but then in your mind, you're thinking about something else, or you're thinking about the next your next set of arguments perhaps, or the next points you want to make, or you're monitoring the room, and so you're taking note of a lot of information while you're already communicating other elements. So the human brain is incredibly complex and capable of undertaking so many tasks simultaneously, and that's a really valuable skill to be able to master in terms of your leadership growth and development. Now, one of the things that I like to start with is an element of cognitive change. It's really about your locus of control. Now, this is another one of those areas that can sometimes be perceived as being better or worse, or right or wrong, when it really isn't the case. Now, remember when we talked about the optimism, pessimism divide, and that how that this is simply where you begin to approach your perspective on a viewpoint, and that neither is right nor wrong, nor good nor bad. They're just different. It's a different perspective taking. And what is really valuable in leadership roles is being really self-aware about where your perspective is likely to begin, so that you can challenge yourself and seek a different perspective. So, if with the optimism, pessimism discussion that we had, we said, well, it doesn't matter where you start, as long as what you try and do is see the other perspective. And that gives you a broader picture. It gives you more information to work with. It helps you challenge your own points of view, and stops you being really myopic about where you begin to analyze a situation. So it just gives you just those few more elements of skill in your arsenal, so that you can really start to think, well, am I being sort of one-sided in the way I perceive this situation? Is there another perspective that could have value and that I should be, considering at least? You might not adopt it. You might have a look at the situation as dispassionately and as analytically as you can, using multiple perspectives, but you might come back to where you start. That's okay, provided you've actually considered other domains. You may not. You may change your perspective because you've considered another way of looking at the situation. You may have consulted with colleagues who have also helped you along that way. So what we have here is referred to as locus of control. And this is, again, another perspective about whether people tend to be more internal in their locus of control or more external. So people who are more internal in their locus of control tend to begin with a perspective where they feel that they are in control in terms of their own environment, that their actions will actually help to improve the environment. A really interesting perspective that's occurred throughout the pandemic is that many people, and I've spoken to many colleagues that I work with here, who may have been quite internally focused in terms of their locus of control, have actually become more external, simply because the environment has become so ambiguous and difficult to predict, that the actions of individuals don't seem to have a great deal of impact in terms of how they're going to operate in their work and oftentimes in their personal life. So that was an interesting transition that people now seem to be transitioning back from, whereas now that the situation, at least in our country, is has improved to such a degree that we're almost operating under normal conditions again, that people have now started to regain what they believed to be their own locus of control. And I guess I see that here in the environment that I work in, because I work with a great deal of people who are really rather independent in how they operate. Certainly we've got research groups where there's interdependencies, but in a lot of ways the individual academic and professional staff, that the work that they're undertaking, the outcomes and the impact that they might have is really based upon their own achievement levels. They have the control over whether they, engage in, research, data gathering and working with colleagues outside of the university, and they have the complete control over the data that they analyse, their ability to write that data up and produce papers and receive academic acclaim from that, and to influence the way in which businesses operate. That's all within them. In fact, if they didn't do that, nothing would happen. They wouldn't be able to impact their environment. So I tend to work with a lot of people who are really quite internally focused in terms of their locus of control. People with a stronger internal locus of control also tend to be quite self-critical in terms of their own skill development, and will recognise readily where they need to gain new skills, where they recognise where they might have some gaps and they need to develop and be able to gather new competencies in order to be able to have greater impact. They also tend to be quite questioning in terms of wanting to know more information in order to be more effective for their own self. So it's a very, and I want to use the word inward, but I don't want it to be seen as something that is negative. But it's a quite strong inward internal focus. In contrast, people who have more of an external locus of control tend to have a much greater focus on what's occurring external to themselves, so in the environment. And in terms of leaders, they're more likely to initiate different structures and be more focused on organizational systems and processes and the way in which other activity like that is undertaken. They also tend to be quite considerate of others, because the focus is the environment, the focus is not on the self. The challenge with that is that they may not have a sense of being able to impact change on the environment necessarily. So they don't necessarily see that individually that they're having impact on the environment. So you can see again with locus of control, and when you start to read some papers in locus of control, you may start to see people sort of gravitating towards that, one is better or worse than others. And you can actually see quite a unique cultural divide in locus of control as well, when you start to think about countries that are more high context, collective cultures versus countries that are more low context individual cultures. And you can see how that then plays out in locus of control quite differently as well. So another interesting conceptualization of how we think about ourselves and our environment and our impact between the self and the environment. So that's a locus of control. So what I'd like you to take away from that is that, again, in terms of your own perspective taking, if you begin to think about your locus of control, and there's a little questionnaire you can do on the site if you'd like to examine how that works for you. You can think about, well, what would happen if I was to deliberately try and think differently? If I was deliberately trying to take a different perspective, what might my thoughts be then? And that's the reason that we're highlighting these different skill sets, just so that you're aware of what it is, and that you can then try and take an alternative perspective. Now, whoops, what's going on here? So if we were, and I've been through this. Oh, look what I've done here. Hang on a minute. Can I just end that? I've given you all the answers. That's not good. This is what I've done before. We're going to work through this. We're going to workshop this together, not use the previous one. There we go. Okay. So now that I've given you all the responses, let's workshop it anyway. So what we've got here is that if we think about locus of control, and think about a time when you're going to be in a situation where you're required to move through an activity such as delivering a critical presentation. Maybe it's a presentation to your supervisor, or to a work group, or to a board, or to in your studies. Maybe it's something to do with an assessment task, but it's a presentation that you're really wanting to make sure that you deliver quite considerable impact. Maybe it's an interview for a job, but you are on the spot, you personally. There isn't anyone else with you. It's not part of a team effort. And so in terms of locus of control, if we were to think about that, and I'd like to, we'll go through and explore this in terms of internal and external. What do you feel would be your emotions in those few minutes before the presentation? Claire, nervous. Excellent. And and Claire's also excited, yes. Might be nervous, and it's possible to be nervous and excited actually all at the same time. Julian's anxious, yeah, excellent. Thanks, Julian. Confident, but only if prep is done, yeah. And you see all of these emotions that we're coming up here with: the nervousness, excited, anxious, confident, maybe a little overwhelmed. These are all dimensions of quite internally focused locus of control. So this is us feeling it internally, and the reason that we're feeling these emotions is that there is an element of what we're going to be contributing that we are responsible for. And maybe we're hopeful, yeah, exhilarated. You guys are excellent at this. Could be a little fearful, yeah. Fabulous. What behaviors may you be demonstrating? So that's how you're feeling. So these are the emotions that you're experiencing. what may you, oh, I can't even, there we are, look at that. What might you be demonstrating in terms of behaviour? Yes, might be a bit shaky, oh, fidgeting, jittery. Might be pacing, fidgeting, checking your notes, checking the presentation. Yep, you're doing all the double checkings. The paranoid parrot, as we often say. Might be actually, you know, trying to calm down, drinking some water because your throat's gone all dry, right? Yeah, maybe you're rehearsing. Trying to do, doing some meditative work with some deep breathing. Excellent. Oh yeah, you might go to the bathroom. checking the shirt for your tomato sauce. Yeah. Usually for me it's coffee. The first thing I do before something, I'm trying to, you know, psych myself up, and then I spill coffee on my shirt, so I'm in the bathroom trying to get it off, trying to dry it with the dryer. that's a good way. I like it. Yeah, any food related stains. Yeah, tomato sauce, coffee. Why does it always happen just before you're going into something really important as well? Why is that the case? You might be, you know, familiarizing yourself with the equipment. Yeah, so you don't want to get, you know, you don't want to seem that you're not prepared while you're giving your presentation, and you don't want anything else that's going to, you know, stress you, so that you can manage the process. Excellent. So what are you thinking when all of this is occurring? So you're thinking through, thinking through the presentation as a rehearsal. Yeah, so you're thinking about your presentation. You know, what about if someone asks, so yeah, so here are the little voices now. What if someone asks me a question I don't know? Maybe doubting yourself, yeah, having some self-doubt, thinking about potential questions. Yeah. What could I have done differently? Yeah. Oh, one, doubting yourself, you know, am I prepared enough? Can't spell. Oh, you might actually be giving yourself a pep talk, so some positive self-talk. Excellent. Fantastic. Now, if you are a more internally focused, so if your locus of control is more internal, you might be you know, using a lot of those thinking skills. So when you doubt yourself, you're starting to doubt yourself, and am I prepared enough? If you're more internally focused, you might turn that around more exclusively to be quite positive and be saying, no, I've done the work, I know this material, I'm going to be okay. So even if you've got some doubts, you might turn that around through your own, you know, locus of control. If you're more external, you may just be that, you know, be so nervous because you're believing that this is completely in the lap of the gods, and that it doesn't matter what you do, the outcome's almost already predetermined because the environment is going to be what is most critical here rather than your actions. Excellent. That was a great list. So what we're going to do now is go back to the presentation mode. And I shall upload this one. I don't believe I uploaded an old version. Gosh, anyway, and I'll change it so that you've got your version up on the site as well. So what we're going to work through now is looking at some of those thinking patterns and how you can influence through greater levels of your own locus of control to improve that self-talk. Because your thinking patterns and the processes that you go through in your mind, in addition to those experiences of emotions and the behaviors, will actually have a really strong impact on how you experience a situation and your ultimate well-being at work and in the world around us. So because the world around us is very complex. The human brain has a great deal of capacity to acquire a lot of information from the environment through our senses. Our brains are wired in a whole range of shortcut fashions, so that we may even be having thoughts that influence the way in which we behave after having experienced elements of the environment, because as we said before when we were looking at emotions come from, you know, an area of our brain where that information is coming in and is processed oftentimes out of our conscious. And what we're trying to do is bring it into our conscious level so that we can respond rather than just receive a stimulus and an emotion that is as a consequence of that. So there's a lot of common thinking patterns on here, and there are more. Many of these are negative thinking patterns. So there are also some positive thinking patterns, of course. But what I'd like to do is just briefly touch on the negative thinking patterns, because you may well have experienced this when you're in situations like those few minutes before you're doing a presentation. And then if you are aware that it's a thinking pattern, you can stop yourself, because you have the capacity then to go, hang on a second, what I've just done is embarked on this negative thinking pattern, and I need to stop and be more critical of my thought process and gather more information out of my environment, and and manage that self-talk just a little bit differently. So some of the suggestions that you had previously, about rehearsal and positive self-talk, and making sure that things were set up so that you were calmer, and you're working through some behaviors that to help you to manage a level of anxiety are really valuable. So let's have a look at some negative common thinking patterns. And I'll start really at the top, at the all or nothing thinking, and just go around the circle. And what you'll see is there's actually a fair degree of synergy and perhaps even some overlap. Like everything that's to do with people, we're not easy to put into a particular box. That there isn't necessarily a black and white outcome for all of these things, and that there tends to be a lot of overlap and a lot of grey when we start to analyse human behaviour and human thoughts and human emotions. So one of the thinking patterns that we frequently get caught up in organisations, particularly at our workplace, is this whole all or nothing thinking. We're either all in or we're all out of a decision, and it's that there's no middle ground, that there's no compromise. And so it's either and we often hear this referred to as my way or the highway. Like it's like one or the other. There's no coming back or negotiating around an outcome and moving to a more collaborative response, or it might not be this or that. There might be another element in between, and we often see that, and that people get stuck, particularly in when we're looking at processes in organisations where it has often been done a particular way, and then when someone suggests looking at a process in a different way, then it's like, nope, that can't be done. I went through that just very recently here with the analysis of our medals for medal winners. So you might be aware that when you go to graduation, that we do have a number of medals that we provide to the undergraduate students when they're received a particular GPA that's the highest for their cohort. And there's, in order to be able to calculate that GPA, of course, you've got to get through all of the grading processes and all the finalisations of grades, and finalisations of grades can take quite a bit of time. They've got to go through a number of academic boards. They go through an academic board. In a faculty, they go through a university academic board. But there's also a whole series of catch-up work that's done. So you might have, 98% of the cohort marked, approved by academic board, marked, moderated, approved by academic board, faculty level, approved by academic board at the university level. But there are things still coming through. So we often have a few students who are in a special consideration category, or have deferred assessment for some reason, or have delayed finalisations of grades for some reason. And so, of course, we can't finalise the medalists until all of that work is done. And so one of the really interesting elements of working through that process is how long it takes to make the final decision about who gets the medal. And we need to have those sorts of activities finalised 2 weeks before graduation. We've got graduation next week, for instance. And it was always usually done, so the medalists were normally finalised like 3 or 4 days before the 2 weeks were out. And that was not giving enough time for any special consideration and final grade activities to come through. And so there's been, quite a bit of contention about what do we do for, students who might be, sitting in that sort of situation. And look, I didn't think we'd have to wait for everybody. So one of my question to the group was, do we know whether we've got final grades for all of the students who are, potential medalists? Because we know who the potential medalists are, because they are students who have grade point averages of 6.8 and above. Normally our medalist winners are people with GPAs of perfect 7s. These are, in single and double degree students. So they've got outstanding academic records. And so you know who they are. I mean, you can look at them and go, well, are all the grades in for all the people who are potential medalists? And so who are we missing? How many people have we got that we don't have grades for in that group? Because surely we could finalise based on that. And why do we need to have that done 4 days out? Why can't we do it the day of when things are due? And there was a quite a big debate amongst the deans and the student business services about this. And they're like, no, it has to be done this way. We can't possibly. And I did say, I think we're getting into some really all or nothing thinking here. It's either only this way or it's not. And so I don't know that that's terribly helpful. And so after a bit of discussion, then they came back with, well, and people, very, crossing their arms and being quite defensive of the conversation, and said, well, if we have all of these results done, we'll only have 2 hours for you to make the final decision. And we're like, oh, it'll take us 3 minutes. Like, it's fine. It's not going to be a really difficult thing to do. We look at the recommendations and go, yes, they've got a 7, they've got a 7, they've got a 7. Great, medalist. That's pretty easy. So it was quite an interesting discussion, and it did change. So we are doing things differently now. We were in fact given 3 hours to make a decision that took, I'm sure each dean took about 2 minutes to make the decision once all the data was in. So we're able to get past it. So you can get really stuck in some all or nothing thinking, particularly if you've got some very tightly held systems or processes that you've always done. So, you know, it's always been done this way. Well, why? Because it's always been done this way. And so you can get really caught up in that all or nothing thinking. And so that can be interesting to get past. A similar thinking pattern can be the whole overgeneralization, if we look at that from a leadership perspective, we can often do that to ourselves. And I think of overgeneralization when I think of whether we like to engage with particularly things, and I see this with colleagues a lot in terms of, and I used presentations before, so I could probably use a different situation, but I often see this more frequently in overgeneralization in fear of presenting to colleagues and to groups particularly. And one of the things that I like to do here with colleagues is actually have different people sharing some of the great impact that they've had throughout the year, particularly when it comes to end of year. We're trying to wrap up things. And then a lot of people will say to me, oh no, but I'm not good at public speaking. I'm not good at speaking. I can't do that. Like I don't want to do that because I'm no good at telling stories. I can't, and they overgeneralize. You hear there's message after message after message after message about how they can't share. And I say, well, I think that's actually an overgeneralization. What you're actually, fearful of more so is the process of public speaking. What if if we sat down and you were just sharing your impact with one colleague? Would that be okay? Oh yeah, I can do that. Okay, so what if I grew the group to about 4 colleagues and we sat around a table? Would that be okay? Oh yeah, I could probably do that. Okay, so if I did that and we filmed it and then I shared it with a whole group, would that be okay? Oh, I don't know. So they're overgeneralizing about their capacity from when, in fact, what they're doing in one context, they could easily do in another context. But because the context changes, then they overgeneralize whether or not they are able to then undertake that activity. So it's like, it's where the generalization becomes in all contexts when in fact it probably isn't. That there is probably some level of unique elements to the context which need to be considered. Selective abstraction is something that where we tend to focus on one element of a problem, or we latch onto something quite selectively and we discount around it. And I think, and I'd like to connect that selective abstraction and the disqualifying the positive to this example, because I see this so frequently with my academic colleagues, and that's about student feedback. So one of the things that we find really valuable is that we ask all of our colleagues and participants, in whether it's in our public courses or in our corporate courses, our short courses, all the different things that we do, we seek feedback all of the time, and we ask people to provide feedback about their experience. And of course, individuals who are participating in these activities, everybody is different and everybody experiences something differently. So having a range of different perspectives is really valuable. And you see that when you go to a hotel and you provide feedback on your stay. If you use an Uber and you provide feedback on that, and if you're on social media, provide feedback on your experience at a restaurant, on all of those sorts of activities. We will provide feedback, and often it's very different because everybody sees things and experiences things differently. And so what's important is to get as much feedback as you possibly can, because then you can start to get a more generalized sense of how people are experiencing something, because there will always be some extreme views, but then there'll be, thematically views that come up. And what I tend to find with my academic colleagues in particular is they will often disqualify a whole series of really positive comments or feedback, and then just very selectively focus on the negative elements and take that and then just live that too much, rather than balancing that with the positive comments, which might actually be really large, and they've only a small number of negative comments or comments about what could be done differently or experienced better from a participant's perspective, and they'll just disqualify all the positive things and just focus on the negative things. And then you see that in reviews and so on, when people are reviewing their experiences or their stay somewhere. And I know I even see it in my own friends and colleagues here, that when they're looking for places to stay at holidays, and they'll be trawling through reams of comments on social media, and then go, aha, there's a negative comment. Yes, well, you don't know the context, you don't know the person's experience on that particular day. It might have been really awful. The particular time that they stayed there might have been rubbish weather, or they might not have been in a good space, and there's all these other really positive things. So you've got to weigh up and not just disqualify positive or selectively attending to only certain types of comments. And then a similar one is really taking a very arbitrary inference over something, so that so what you're doing is that you're in a lot of ways disqualifying anything that doesn't actually apply to what you've considered to be quite an arbitrary summation of something. So you might end up, if I apply it to that previous example of all of the comments, you might arbitrarily just say, well, it's great to have all those positive things, but really the way in which we're going to improve is just based on these negative comments. And so it can be quite arbitrary about what you choose to focus on. Or it might be, for instance, that and I see this also in feedback, that people arbitrarily dismiss anything that is about interaction and all of those sorts of things, and focus simply on assessment tasks. And so it's quite arbitrary about what gets focused on. The next set of thinking patterns really have an emotional dimension to them as well. And so it's not just about a blockage where your focus is, which is what those others have been that we've just focused on. But these negative thinking patterns do have an emotional dimension to them as well, such as catastrophizing and emotional reasoning and the should and shouldn't approaches. So in catastrophizing, it's like something didn't quite go okay. So if we go back to our presentation, and it's like, oh, I've spilt the tomato sauce on my shirt, and you're trying to get it off, or spilt coffee. In fact, I did that just the other day yesterday it was, before going into a big meeting with the Vice Chancellor and a whole series of people. And I was wearing something dark, thankfully, but I spilt coffee on myself, and I'm like, and, trying to get rid of it. And I had to say to myself, don't catastrophize. It's just coffee. Because I was already doing that as well. I'm like, oh no, I'm going to be in a bad space now because I've spilt coffee on myself, and, my head's now distracted, and I'm not as ready as what I thought I would be. And I was like, no, stop it. You just spilled coffee. Just wash it off. Get on with what you're doing. And then some, emotional reasoning, where you start to have, this lovely little emotional debate in your head. And a lot of this comes down to I should have done this, I shouldn't have done that, or I did this because I was feeling this way. And you really start to get into some negative beliefs and thinking patterns that are probably not, you know, as strong as what you are making them, and they're being that you can halt that process and change the way you are thinking. And then that comes to other areas of labeling and mislabeling in terms of the way in which you're thinking about things, and often a little bit more emotionally as well. And so you start to not really evaluate a situation or a context as effectively, because you just start to label what's occurring and label it quite negatively. And sometimes you can over-personalise a situation and think that you're having a debate, particularly, and I see that a little bit, not as much in this environment. I used to see it a lot more in my corporate environments, where the moment that somebody had a different perspective and challenged in a meeting somebody, I was like, oh, well, I actually think about it differently, or I had a different experience, or, you know, one of our clients had reported something differently. And then as soon as somebody is challenged, they're like, oh, this person doesn't like me. So they're making it all very personal, when it's not. We're just having a difference of perspective, and bringing lots of perspectives to the table is really valuable to come through to a more accurate and if you like, analytical conclusion. But it's really easy to jump down that personalized rabbit hole. And so those negative thinking patterns are really, you know, have a level of emotion as well as cognition to them. But if you can grab yourself and say, oh, hang on a second, and what I do is what I'm doing right now, you know, a negative thinking pattern, and then you can really be a little bit more analytical and stop and go, oh, hang on, is this really as bad as what I'm actually making it out in my head? Do I need to stop and actually look for what we refer to now as disconfirming evidence? So, you know, in your assessment task one, when you're looking for, you know, answering your question, you're looking for research that, you know, found in support, as well as research that, you know, did not find support. So what you're looking for is disconfirming evidence to actually help stop those negative thinking patterns. Anybody have any comments or questions about that, or times when you've caught yourself in a negative thinking pattern, or know when you tend to catastrophize, or you just selectively focus on negative experiences and not the positive ones? Or you emotionally reason with yourself? I emotionally reason with myself when I'm about to eat potato chips. It's one of my go-to things that I can emotionally reason for why I shouldn't do that, rather than be more healthy in my eating. Okay. All right. So let's just move on then and start to think about what you can do differently if you're going to try and get past negative thinking patterns. And those are some common ones. And of course, there's a whole lot of other thinking patterns. But what we'd like to do is be able to get past that and to stop some of the negative self-talk, and to create more positive ways in which you can self-motivate and give yourself your own coach. Be your own coach. Britt, that's a great example that, you know, you've done something that you think is embarrassing in public, and like you now think that everyone's laughing at you, or everyone noticed, and you know, you're now overwhelmed by that a little bit, and people may not have noticed at all, you know, or have given it, you know, hardly any thought at all. You know, it's they've moved on with their day, and you're still like, oh, what's going on? Yes. It's amazing how your brain takes over and makes up a whole series of things that just may not exist in the rational world. Okay, so let's have a look at, I've got a bit of a yellow squiggle. I don't know why I've got a yellow squiggle. So if we have a look at cognitive self-management, which is really now where we're getting into, Mark tried to get into the wrong car. Oh, I love it. It's like when you feel like, oh, he's such a thing. I remember one time I was at an airport, and I went to grab what I thought was my bag, and it was someone else's bag, and they came and grabbed it from me, and I'm like, oh. I thought the entire airport was thinking I was some kind of bag thief.
The car that I got into, I went in a company car on a work outing, and it was exactly the same color and same type of car, and I was trying to open it and trying to get in, and this place was packed, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I took me like 2 minutes to realize it. Why can I get into this car? Why is this key not working? But it was completely me. And I thought, is everyone looking at me? But I hope they weren't. I don't know if they were, but I was so embarrassed. It was terrible.
It's funny, isn't it? But you immediately feel like the whole world is watching you. Everyone in that car park must have seen, what you did, and laughing at you,
Exactly. That's right. It's horrible.
And like probably people didn't even notice.
I know. Exactly. Yeah. Hopefully. Yeah.
So it's incredible how we well these things up. And then that actually has a real impact then on ourselves. And we're like, now we need to really focus on our own cognitive self-management. And we can actually be our own best coaches. You don't need to have, all of the other coaches on the outside of you if you're able to really get into your own self-talk. And in fact, many coaches, and particularly if you look at coaches, and you see this now more in executive coaches as well, but if you look at the, sporting and, elite athletes, many coaches try and help their athletes with cognitive self-management. That is actually one of the biggest tools in their arsenal to help people become even better at what they do. And we're talking elite people, in the Olympics, when people are trying to make fractions of seconds of, difference in the speed or, capacity in their races. We're talking, minute advances that make a really big difference in terms of where someone might come in a race or whatever. But a lot of it is about actually not only the physical dimension, but it's the mental dimension that really helps to improve the strides. And so our self-talk is that those things that we covertly tell ourselves whilst we're in the midst of an activity. And so what we need to be able to do is to ensure that we're really aware of what our self-talk is. And oftentimes we are not as aware as we could be. And so we could be focused a little more, particularly if we know beforehand that we're going to be going into a situation where we might be more anxious. So, that one right at the very beginning when I talked about the important presentation or an interview or, something that that you're likely to have your emotions raised a little bit. And that's because normally the stakes are a bit high for you. And so this is a time when you can help to prepare yourself for it emotionally and cognitively by thinking about your own self-talk and actually going through, a series of rehearsals. At the very beginning, a number of you talked about rehearsals of a task. And that's something that I found really fascinating, and particularly when in the elite athlete area. One of my daughters, when she was growing up, was training for the Commonwealth Games in gymnastics. And so I got to go, she didn't make it, sadly, to a games, but, you know, she was in the squad. But I got to see a lot of how that preparation went, and the sports psychologists that work with the team in preparing the girls, so there was the girls, women's artistic gymnastics, and see how they helped the girls prepare for it. There was so much mental rehearsal of activities, and so the girls would be trained to, before they went through to an apparatus, that they would get into a zone where they were ignoring all of the environment that was around them and getting into this mental zone where they were mentally rehearsing all of their routine, down to, you know, an nth degree. And you could see it, many of them would have, you know, when they were in their rehearsal mode, they would do little movements of their body which, you know, sort of indicate, you know, what part of the routine they were at in their rehearsal phase. But they would rehearse and rehearse and rehearse and rehearse mentally first before engaging in the activity. Now, of course, they've rehearsed the routine over and over and over again, I don't know how many times anyway, a lot, and to try and improve their performance each time. But the one thing that really helped them to tackle the nerves when the stakes were high was to make sure that their mental imagery was strong, and that in that rehearsal that they were really successful. And so that's a small thing that we can do for ourselves in terms of our own cognitive self-management, to ensure that what we engage in then is more productive behaviours when we're in a situation. And I also think that, you know, in a workplace context, if you're rehearsing, and we talked about a presentation, if you're rehearsing and you're thinking about questions that might come along and thinking about how you might respond to those questions, you are already preparing yourself, and you might over prepare. You might have asked yourself a whole lot of different questions that don't get asked, but you know, I think that will help to increase that locus of control, to increase that level of self-confidence, to increase your self-efficacy, that you will be more effective in the zone, as they say. Okay, I got through a bit faster than I thought I would, and I just wanted to share, you know, a little story as well about when we talk about rehearsal. A lot of people at the moment, of course, you know, when it's coming towards the end of the year, so, you know, people aren't necessarily thinking about new roles. But at QT at the moment, we're going through a big change process. So we're doing a lot of redundancies, and we've got some new roles that people are applying for. So I'm actually trying to help my team who are redundant apply for new positions and to be seeking new opportunities. And now some of them, it's been a while since they've interviewed, but some it hasn't been that long, because we only went through a change process a couple of years ago. And I did have a couple of colleagues come to me and say, "Oh, I don't know that I want to participate in the interview rehearsal process, because it's not really the real thing, and I'm not, you know, I don't know that it's going to be all of that effective." And then, and I said, "Well, that's okay. It's, you know, it's your choice. You can choose to participate or not." But then I said, I used my own experiences as an example. And I said, I've been on literally, look, I don't know how many interview panels over my life, because I was a HR practitioner before coming into the university. I've been in the university for more than 20 years. I was in HR for more than 20 years. So the number of interviews I've run is many dozens. I absolutely lost count. I haven't participated, though, as the applicant in all that many. So I've been on the other side of the table more so than I have been the applicant. And even myself, who is an extremely experienced interviewer, experiences the same thing when I'm an interviewee as others do. So once it's high stakes, your emotions are there. You know, you start to have thinking patterns that can struggle, because as soon as you get a panel member that asks you a question that you may not have prepared for, so you do need to do a little bit of thinking. You know, sometimes you get a little bit nervous about that, and you know, you might struggle a little. I said the best of us in terms of being experienced at interviews can come unstuck. And so the most effective thing that you can do in preparing for situations that are a bit more high stakes is rehearse. Rehearse by having practice, you know, groups in order to help prepare you and provide you with the feedback. And when you have a practice and you rehearse and you use your self-management skills cognitively, you are more likely to set yourself up for success than you are to set yourself up for failure. You're more likely to experience you know, a poorer outcome if you don't mentally prepare, you don't mentally and physically rehearse for an activity, and be aware of your thinking biases during it. So managing that self-talk during the process as well. And if you're able to do that, you're more likely to be successful. And like our elite athletes, you know, continue to grow in your personal best outcomes. Okay, so that's all really that I had to share in terms of our cognitive training for today. I'm really happy to have any conversations that people might like to have about your own reflections in terms of your portfolio that I'm sure you've started to look at now. One of the things that I thought was a bit fun to have a look at today, which is that they refer to as the procrastination monkey. And that's Tim Urban's TED Talk. It's a bit fun. I think it's a bit fun myself. You know, I like the whole idea about procrastination, because it's one of the things that requires a great deal of your own self-management and your own coaching in order to prevent you from doing that. And there's some interesting research on procrastination, and it's the self-sabotage element that underpins procrastination, and why we psychologically why we work through that. But I know that actually TED Talks are one of my procrastination monkey activities. I always think that I need to have a look at a lot of TED Talks, so therefore I get to watch so many different ones that, you know, I keep making excuses for why I need to do more, instead of, you know, finalizing that budget or something that doesn't seem anywhere as interesting. Anyway, so have a look at that, and then post your suggestions on the discussion board. So there's quite a few different videos to have a look at today if you're interested. Of course, this is all about what floats your boat and what things that you're more interested in a leadership sense. So please don't feel that, you know, feel pressured again to look at everything. But okay, so does anyone have anything that they'd like to talk about or ask? Any questions or comments?
Amanda, sorry,
Yeah.
I've got one question. To be honest, I'm struggling a little bit with the second assignment, and I'm struggling more just to start it, which is often the way I work. And if I can get started, I think that's probably a good thing to. But I just maybe a tip on something we can launch from, something that we can, just to kind of give us a bit of inspiration to start it.
Yeah. Look, you know what, for myself, I usually find my best inspiration comes from any feedback that I might get from somebody else, because that often gives me an area to begin focusing, because there is so much. So it's either something that I really think I'm quite passionate about finding out more of or being better at, or where someone else has given me some feedback. So I usually, you know, I tend to start there. There's so much in terms of all of the material that it's really easy to get overwhelmed. And so I tend to try and myself step back and go, what is it that I need right now? And that might come from feedback from somebody else, or it might come from me just going, oh, look, right at this point in time, and can I just use myself as an example right now?
Yeah.
We're going through this, it's a really tumultuous time right now in the higher education sector, full stop. And what I've done, and you'll see it on the, I think it's next session's mindfulness. I have done a whole lot of extra work on mindfulness, which I'll be making some changes to our session next week, because I've just needed that. I have just needed to be able to take a break mentally from all of the tension and the stress and the experiences of all of my colleagues, which I'm trying to support. And so in order to be able to be effective to support them, I need to be really centered. And I'm not particularly good at taking those breaks. Like I tend to keep going until it gets to a point like, well, I just desperately need a holiday. So I need to be able to practice more mindfulness every day. And this is something that I'm really bad at. And so because I know that in my context, I need to be more available for everybody else. In order to be more available for everyone else, I've had to make sure that I'm really centered. And so I've been working on my own mindfulness strategies for the last couple of weeks. And so that's just been my focus. So I've just taken that and gone, everything else I just can't, I don't have the capacity, the bandwidth to deal with. So I'm just going to look at that for now. And that's going to be my focus. And so it's just that it's only because that is the context that I'm in right now that I've taken that focus. So that might be something else for you to think about. What is your context right now? What do you really need? And zone in on that rather than even exploring other areas. Does that?
Yeah, no, that's good. That helps. That helps
a
lot. Thank you. Yeah, that's good. Thanks.
Yeah, so you'll see a whole lot of different mindfulness things simply because that's what I've needed. So that'll happen next session. Anyone else got any questions or comments? Thoughts or experiences you want to share? No? I'll just stop sharing the slides actually so we can see each other if we need. There we go. Okay, well, I think we've probably come to the end then. All right, lovely. Thanks everyone for joining. I'll be in my consultation room again after this. So if anyone does have something that they went, oh, I actually meant to ask that, then please feel free to just pop in and say hi and have a chat. Lovely. Thanks everyone. See you next week. Have a lovely weekend.